Thank you all for coming today to address what is a crisis in our country, not only to our seniors, but to all of us. I am a victim of what is called an oil rig romance scam. How did I become a victim? Here's my story. My husband of 46 years died from complications from lung cancer at the age of 2022, or in the year of 2022. I had never lived alone, having met him right out of college. We were on the verge of retirement with plans of travel and living the life we had worked and saved for. Needless to say, I was devastated and lost. With the help of my family and friends, I realized my life was not over, and David wouldn't have wanted me to spend my days feeling sorry for myself. For 3 years, I kept myself busy, volunteering, attending events, lunches, and dinners with my friends, but the hole in my heart was still here. After talking with a married couple who had met online, I started researching online dating sites. I selected eHarmony as Forbes rated it as the top safest. I started out slowly, selecting a flattering picture of myself and then sharing my interests of travel, wine, and food. I explained I was a widow and looking for a partner. I wanted to paint a true picture of myself. Several matches came up from rural areas around New Mexico, and some men were a decade or more older than me. But one man caught my eye, so I clicked on the heart, indicating I was interested. He did too. Soon we were sharing exchanges through the site. He, like me, had lost his spouse, and like me, was looking for a partner. Soon we agreed that a phone conversation was the next step. Our first one lasted over 30 minutes. We clicked immediately. He then texted me saying how much he had enjoyed talking with me. After a couple more phone calls, we shared email addresses. He asked many questions about me, and we both shared stories of our childhood and life experiences. He, like me, had recently retired. He had been an oil and gas geologist and was starting his own consulting company. Our relationship escalated quickly. He told me he had recently moved to Albuquerque and was staying in a friend's rental apartment. He wanted to come to Santa Fe to meet me. He would stay in a hotel for a week or so to give us the opportunity to meet each other. I agreed and sent him a link of a small hotel near my home. But before this could happen, he called to tell me there was a conference in Houston that he should attend, but it would interfere with his coming to meet me. He was upset about having to make the decision and the delay it would cause. I told him that if he needed to go to promote his business, he should go. I felt I had no right to stop him, as we hadn't even met yet, and this was his livelihood. The relief that he expressed was palatable. He thanked me and promised to come to Santa Fe as soon as the conference was over. He needed to leave in 2 days and had a lot of work to accomplish to be ready for the conference, so there was no opportunity to meet him before he left. At this point, he had taken his profile off eHarmony, as he said he kept getting hits from women he wasn't interested in and were only looking for one-night stands. He didn't want it to interfere with our relationship. We were now speaking and emailing several times a day, looking forward to when we could be together. The Houston conference turned into an opportunity for him to submit a proposal to Chevron to be the project manager of a new oil rig. He would stay in Houston to work on getting a bid for proposal, the first step in applying for this job. I was impressed with the scope of the project and admired him for wanting to take on such a project when he succeeded getting the job. He assured me that if he won the bid, he would need to be on the rig for a few weeks, but then would alternate weeks on and work weeks off, and that he would be able to come and meet me soon. Somewhat hoping he would not win the bid, we continued to talk several times a day. He started each day writing an email about how much I meant to him and how happy he was that I'd come into his life. These were exquisitely worded emails, to which I would spend up to an hour every morning responding. He was very romantic and attentive. He emotionally bared himself to me, and I reciprocated. The one hitch in him winning the bid was that because Chevron had been burned by a previous contractor, they wanted him to show them his bank statements to prove that he had $3 million in his bank account. He spent the next week hitting up family and close friends for money. I hoped and prayed he would not ask me, but he did. I refused at first, but he wore me down. It took about a week for him to convince me that my investment into our future, where he had the opportunity to make tens of millions of dollars, was safe. The money would sit in an escrow account and be reimbursed to everyone as soon as he secured the contract. Despite my reservations, I secured the money, telling my investment advisor I was helping out a relative. The money came out of my IRA, and there was a 60-day window before it would become taxable. I was sure we would get together before then. Before I sent the money, we each signed a promissory note, exchanging our driver's license. He asked for a cashier's check made out to his and sent to his bookkeeper so she could transfer the money to his business account. I did as he asked, taking photographs of the check and the promissory note. We were in constant contact with each other. We even did a couple of WhatsApp calls, and he looked just like the photo he had sent me and the one on his driver's license. He kept me apprised of each step of the project, including a photo taken from a visit to the oil rig. It took about 10 days, but at last the contract was signed. His next weeks were spent getting the equipment and team together that he would need to start. Sometimes he would call me while he was driving around Houston just to hear my voice. Soon I was texting him each morning when I woke up. That was his signal to call me before his day started. We would speak midday and again in the late afternoon and end our days by reading our emails to each other. He started the job on the rig and promised it would only be 2 weeks before he could meet me. Then he would have a week off and off before having to go back, but that eventually he would have 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. That turned into 4 weeks as he had to continue his supervision of the project to assure Chevron had everything running smoothly. One day, a package containing 24 red roses and a box of chocolate-covered strawberries arrived at my door. On the same day, I received a Federal Express package, and in it was a check made out to his company for a dollar figure higher than I had ever seen. It was my assurance that I would get my money back. He said it was his way of thanking me for believing in him. That was a very good day. He finally got approval to leave the rig, and during our first morning call, as we anticipated being together in the next week, a high-pitched sound came over the phone. As a project manager, he needed to find out what was happening, so he hung up quickly. About 10 minutes later, he texted me that a fire had broken out and that there were people who were injured. Another 10 minutes passed, and he called to let me know that the fire had been extinguished and that he was not injured. I thought this to be very considerate of him, considering he was in the middle of an emergency. Up to this time, we had kept our relationship secret. He was very insistent about that. He suggested I watch a reality show called Love is Blind, in which men and women meet and talk through a barrier. The premise was that they would get to know each other intellectually and emotionally, not just based on appearances. That made sense to me, so I kept our secret. Because of the fire, he now had to stay to handle all that needed to be done to get the rig running again. This hit me hard. I'd spent weeks preparing for his visit, purchasing everything from new bath towels and rugs and even lingerie in anticipation. He assured me he would come as soon as possible, so I kept my hopes up. We continued our routine calls and texts, deepening our feelings for each other to include marriage. He started to call me his wife, as he said it was the only way he could honor what I meant to him. I was on cloud 9. All along the way, I asked him questions. He was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and went to university in England. He had a daughter and 2 grandchildren that he adored. He had worked on rigs in the North Sea and in Indonesia and had traveled all over the world. His accent was not the Scottish brogue that I knew, but he explained that while in Indonesia, he had had to temper his accent so they would understand him. He was reluctant to talk about his wife because he said it was too painful. He had sold his house in Houston and moved to Albuquerque because he couldn't live there anymore with her memory. His driver's license had a Houston address on it, so I believed him. The reason he didn't have an internet presence, he told me, was that he had been hacked and had wiped as much of his personal data out as he could. He kept me apprised of the progress in replacing the rig equipment and promises to come soon. He was having difficulty replacing one large piece of equipment, which he couldn't get in the U.S., but it would have to come from China. Many times he had hung up from one of our calls to take a call from a Chinese purveyor, as it was his only chance, given the time differences. So I knew he had connections there. We were now several months into our relationship. I was in love and loved, something that I had been missing and longing for in my life. He made me feel young and sexy. He was all I had hoped for and more. In my euphoria, I broke my promise and shared my good fortune with my closest friend and her husband. Don had retired from a job in IT security and wanted me to send this man's contact information to him. I did so reluctantly, hoping that it would prove that he was who he was, and that they would soon understand when meeting him, why I felt as I did. What my friend uncovered was nothing. He could not find a trace of him. His company's website domain had been set up in September, a month after we met. I was stunned and didn't want to believe it. In tears, I called him and accused him of scamming me, which he denied. I reluctantly blocked him from calling or emailing me. I confided in my sister, but I did not tell her I'd given him money. I told no one. I lasted 3 days before I unblocked him and sent him an email asking if he had ever loved me, or was it just about the money? He assured me he had, and he did love me, that it was never about the money, as we had grown close before we knew each other's financial situation. We picked up where we left off. I told no one. I still had a multi-million-dollar check in my safe, giving me hope. Soon after, he told me that he had signed a contract and arranged for the piece of equipment to be flown in from China in order to get it as fast as possible so he could come to Santa Fe. However, he didn't have enough money to pay for the flight and hoped I could help him out. I started to hyperventilate, shouting that he should never have signed a contract without asking me, and that I would not, under any circumstances, give him any more money. He still hadn't paid me back for the first loan. Yet he wore me down again, saying he would lose the contract and end up in lawsuits if he couldn't raise the money. He said he would still love me even if I didn't give him the money, but he could lose everything. I emailed my investor, who strongly discouraged me from taking more money from my IRA, as it would mean 5 years off my retirement. This was my wake-up call. I realized I was lying to everyone I knew in order to protect a man I had never met. I wrote him an email saying I could no longer continue and blocked him once and for all. I spent the day grieving almost as I had for my husband's death. It was everything I could do not to pick up my phone, but I stayed strong. For days I wrestled with what had happened, remembering the intimacy we had shared. I even called the phone number of his bookkeeper, who I had found on a search. The number was disconnected, giving me the final proof that it had all been a scam. It wasn't until later that I began to understand the psychological manipulation I had experienced, causing me to gloss over what should have been red flags. How he had set me up, taken advantage of my kind and trusting nature and my vulnerability, and given me everything he thought I needed to stay with him. I reported him to the FBI and to the New Mexico Attorney General's office. I went to AARP's fraud site and attended several of their romance scam group meetings, hearing women and men talk about their experiences. I quickly realized that I was not alone, that it was not some failure in me. We were all victims. I also realized I was fortunate to get out when I did. Many others have lost everything, material possessions as well as emotional support. My friends and family stayed with me, and I did not give away all of my savings. I could still have a secure future, but many, many victims are not so fortunate. I learned from AARP that senior fraud is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there are very few consequences. This is why I agreed to speak today. It needs to be known that it is a virus infecting our country, not only for seniors, but to all of us. If I can help one person not take the bait or have one predator found out, it is worth the pain I went through. I don't have a solution, but I'm hoping meetings like this will work toward finding one. Thank you for your time and listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Paula, for sharing that very vulnerable and just heartfelt story. It's not easy for folks to come forward, as we know in these situations, to be able to share their personal experiences with fraud and scam. So thank you so much.